Beginning of this Farbrengen, the Rebbe was talking about something that he mentions very often, which is the unique thing about the Mittler Rebbe, which he's going to refer to a lot during this Sikha. And that is that the Mittler Rebbe was known to be Rechoivos Hanor, the broadness of the river. We mentioned this also in previous Shiurim. The Alter Rebbe was likened to Chachma. Chachma is only points. It's like a mayan, like a wellspring that only a few drops come out. But eventually from that came from the Mittler Rebbe's Mamarim, which were Rechoivos Hanor, a broadening of the river. And then the Rebbe even goes on and says this idea of the Mittler Rebbe being Rechoivos Hanor was even before he was imprisoned. And so the idea of the Geula that follows on the Rechoivos Hanor means that now there's a redemption in the Rechoivos Hanor, that the broadness of the Mittler Rebbe is even greater after the redemption of Yud Kislev versus the way it was prior to the redemption of Yud Kislev. So the Rebbe essentially says that this is all a lesson that a person has to have broadness and expanding and expansion in study of Torah and in Chassidus and in spreading the well springs outward. But here the Rebbe translates it now concerning what this means in a more practical sense, as if, learning more Torah and spreading more Chassidus is not practical enough. So the Rebbe says in Ois Hey, 4 paragraphs from the bottom of the page, from broadness in Torah, coming down to broadness in action, which action is primary. And to preface, all matters of Torah become expressed also concerning action in matters of this world. Like the statement of the Zohar is Istakel B'Raiso Bara Alma. He looked into the world, into the Torah, and he created the world. V'inyoni ba'avoda, and the idea of in avodas Hashem means, so Hashem did it that way. What does this mean in our service? The idea that Hashem looked into the Torah and created the world. All matters of Torah need to permeate and express themselves in all detailed matters of our day-to-day life. Not only in matters of Kedusha. Obviously, to be able to know matters of Kedusha, you got to look in Torah. Torah tells you how to be a holy person. But elegam binyan rishus, but also in permitted manners, in non-obligatory manners. That through those permitted matters becomes the avodah of in all your ways you shall know him, meaning your ways, that you are doing your activities, not holy activities. If it's not on the level that you know him in your ways, at least it is serving as a stepping stone that all your actions will eventually be for the sake of heaven, that you will use the actions for heaven. If the above is said concerning the avodah of every single yid, that Torah needs to influence their day-to-day life in every single detail, so it's surely that this matter is even more emphasized by a leader amongst Yidden. And in our case, the idea of the broadness of the river in the teachings of the one whose Geula it was, in other words, the Mittler Rebbe, it has to come out and it has to express itself also in an approach and in a movement of broadness in all matters, in all other matters, not just matters of Torah. We're going to skip the brackets to the 3rd paragraph from the following page. Therefore, yeshna inyan klali shel ma'aseh b'poil. There's a general matter involving action. Sheboim mizbate klolas ha'inyan derechayvus hanor debina. that in it is expressed the general idea of the broadness of the river, which is Bina. Inyan HaSimcha, the idea of joy. Very clear, the Rebbe says that Bina has to do with joy. The Mittler Rebbe's Torah has to do with joy. Kidla Kamon, as he will explain. Bira Inyan, the explanation of this matter is Spheres HaBina Kshura Inyan HaSimcha. The sphere of the 10 spheres of Bina is connected with Simcha. Like it says, Eim Abonim Smecha. We say this in Hallel. The mother of the children rejoices. Eim Habonim, what in spheres, what does Eim Habonim refer to? It refers to Koyal Bina. It's referring to the spheres of sphere of Bina, as we know. Kimevur Betanya Betchilose, like it's explained in the beginning of Tanya. Chachma Bina Hem Ava Eim Shemehem Noldim Bonim. Chachma Bina, our father and mother, that from them children are born. Shivas Hamidus, the 7 Midas are the children of Chachma and Bina. V'yesh lekasher zeh, v'yesh lekasher inyan zeh in Parshas Hashavua the Shabbos zu Parshas Vayetze. We can connect this with the Torah portion of the week. Parshas Vayetze, Shabon Nemar, over there it says, when it talks about the daughters of Lavan, it says Shem Hagdoilo Leah. I spoke about this recently with someone that asked me this question. Shem Hagdoilo Leah, the name of the older one was Leah. This is going the Koyal Bina. It's referring to the sphere of Bina. Hagdoila can be divided into 2. Hey Gdoila, the large Hey, meaning in Yud Kei Vav Kei we know there are 2 Heys. Larger in this case means it's in a higher level. So we know Yud Kei Vav Kei, each one of them correspond to either a sphere or a group of sphere. The last Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei goes on Spheres of Malchus. The first Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yud and Hey, Yud is the dot, like we spoke about Chochma was the Alter Rebbe. Hey is already a broadness that's going on Bina. So Leah was Hagdoila, the Hey Gdoila, the large Hey, the first Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's the level of Bina. Ubehemshcha Parsha Mesuper, and the continuation of the Parsha, it relates, Shaleah Yolda Shisha Bonim B'Acharkach Yolda Bas. Leah gave birth to the 6 sons, and afterwards she had a daughter, Dinah. The Koi al Shivas Hamidas Shneladim Bina, it's referring to the 7 Midas that were born from Bina. Shisha Bonim Zeir Ampin. The 6 Midas, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chod Yisoid, that's the 6 male children, the boys. Ubas, we know the level of Bas, of daughter, that has to do with Spheres HaMalchus. So someone asked me this week, as I mentioned before, why was Leah unique that she had 6 boys and all the other Imahis only had 2 each? This has to do, and I mentioned this word, Leah was the level of Bina. Bina give birth to 6 Midas, and then the final one was a daughter, that's the level of Malchus. That's what it means. The mother of the children is rejoicing. The idea of rejoicing has to do primarily with the mother of the children, Bina, and it doesn't just remain with her, but from the mother of the children, from Bina, comes down the rejoicing also to the children. Shekhem b'teva told is bonim. It's in the nature of offspring, children. Sheyesh etzlam kol inyanim sheitol avos v'yimois. They have all the matters that are by their fathers and mothers. Ad kedei kach, to such a degree she'ein adavar toli b'bchirosim. This is independent of their choice. This is by nature. So if the mother is rejoicing, so the children are rejoicing. So that is one connection between this idea of the Mittler Rebbe and the idea of Simcha, because it's Bina. Now the Rebbe is going to bring the idea of Rechoives HaNahar, the idea of the broadness, the breadth of the river, the great expansion that there is to be found in Bina. That particular characteristic also has to do with Bina. It's 3 paragraphs on the bottom, Yesh Lahoisiv, and we can add, Shagam HaTchuna de Rechoives HaNahar de Bina. Also, the characteristic of the breadth of the river of Bina, Shayeches Leina Simcha, is also associated with the idea of joy. Ki achas atchunas hamafyonas as inyan hasimchi, one of the characteristics that express or that joy has, what are the characteristics is? Simcha peretzes gather. Simcha breaks through barriers. So now the Rebbe gives a very interesting, an interesting explanation of this well-known phrase that the Rebbe constantly repeats, and he analyzes this phrase. He says, the last paragraph, "V'hine mediuk haloshin poiritz gather," from the exact language that it breaks through barriers. It doesn't say it causes the barriers to cease, to stop existing. Breaking through a barrier indicates that there's still a barrier. Even after breaking it through, there's still the barrier. But barrier is broken through. Let's skip the parentheses. Muchach. So from this, it's obvious. She'ein hakavana legeder bilti rotzi. Over here, we're not talking about that the simcha is breaking through some type of barrier that is a negative thing. Geder v'agbolo d'luma zechas, that we're speaking about a barrier and a limitation of the other side, heaven forbid. Shekein geder kozeh yesh levatli mechol v'chol v'lo lasis v'pirtza. If it's a barrier that's being thrown up by clippers, obstacles that are being made by clippers, that's not an obstacle that one breaks through. That's an obstacle that you have to totally nullify. Surely we must say that when we're talking about simcha breaks through a barrier, we're talking about the intention over here is the barrier and the boundary of holiness. Like the Rebbe a lot of times speaks about that even in Kedusha there's idea of Mitzrayim from the word Meitzar, that it's constrained. That a person could go and do in Kedusha and just check off all the boxes and everything is constrained and everything has its place and I do the right thing and I daven and I learn and whatever. But these are all barriers that a person has to, even though they're good things, a person has to break out of them. Because the great advantage and quality of joy, it has its capability to break through the barrier and the boundary of Kedusha, of holiness. That's a connection with the idea of the broadness of the river. When we break through the barriers of those measures and boundaries of holiness, then we come to a state and situation that's beyond every measure and boundary. Tachlis Archava, the ultimate broadness, like we said, that's the idea of what the Mittler Rebbe stood for. Al Pisa moving according to this understood. Shinyoni Shalbal Agula, the Yud Kislev, the idea and the concept of the one whose redemption is on Yud Kislev, the Mittler Rebbe, Rechoives Hanar the Bina, the broadness of the river of Bina. In addition to the basic idea that we need to learn from it, to be broad in Torah, broad in the study of Chassidus, and broad in the Afotza Mayonis Chutza, in the spreading of the wellsprings outward, it should be in a way of broadness. It also has to express itself in action, in the idea of joy. According to what was said earlier, and I mentioned this, that the Rebbe spoke about this earlier in the Farbrengen, the idea of the redemption of the 10th of Kislev affected an elevation and an increase in the broadness of the river of Bina itself, because the broadness of the river of Bina, of the Mittler Rebbe, existed prior to the redemption, prior to his imprisonment, prior to his release from imprisonment. So therefore, obviously, once he was released from imprisonment, this added greater impetus and a greater strength to what he was about, to the broadness of the river. So in addition to all of this, it's understood that so it's also concerning the idea of joy. Shenoisef al inyan simcha pritzes ageder mitzad klos and yonish admor amtzoi bal hageula, in addition to the idea of joy and breaking through of boundaries, because the general idea of the Mittler Rebbe, whose geula it was, tzarich liyos ilui vaysafa va'ofen shel geula, there has to be an elevation and an increase in such a way that it's called a redemption. Just like redeeming from prison is incomparable to what he was before, the inyan hasimcha pritzes gather gufa, and the idea of joy and the breaking through boundaries itself. What does that mean? So the Rebbe says, let's put it in very simple language. Kislev, standing on the 10th of Kislev, the day of the redemption, the Mittler Rebbe, that the idea behind it is the broadness of the river of Bina. We have to add and increase in a much more powerful way in all matters of joy. The mother of the children is rejoicing. The princess gather in the way of breaking through boundaries, the broadness of the river. We have to increase Simcha Shel Torah, the rejoicing, the joy of Torah, Simcha Shel Mitzvah, and the joy of Mitzvah, Simcha Binyan Rishus, until even a joy in permitted matters. Like we said before, Kol Masecha Yilshem Shemaim, all your actions should be for the sake of heaven. Ubechol Drachecha De'eu, in all your ways you shall know. Moving, it's understood. Shekala Amr Le'il B'Negel Le'inyan HaSimcha, all that was said prior to this concerning the idea of joy, Shayech L'chol Echad Ve'echad Mi Yisrael, is applicable to every single Yid, B'chol Maimed U'Matzav, in every state and situation, Gam L'Poshut U'B'Pshutim, even the most ordinary person, U'Bagdam, and by introduction. And here the Rebbe is gonna bring up something that we've learned earlier as well. Duber Kama Pa'amim, and as the Rebbe himself said, it was spoken about many times. This klolus inyan hasimcha, about the general idea of joy, b'meshach kol hashana kula, throughout the entire year. Shein tzoydech lechapes sibis miyuchodes l'inyan hasimcha. No, you don't have to search for special reasons, for unique reasons for the idea of joy. Shekein medei yom b'yom, because every single day, miyad ba'as kol sayom, immediately at the beginning of the day, omer kol echad v'echad misrol, every single yid says, I thank you, as the King who is living and existing, that you return to me, my neshama. This is understood and even obvious to every single yid, even the most ordinary person. The great joy in the matter, the Eibishter, the King who lives and exists, is in his own very self, places all of his matters on his side, and he turns to the Yid to return to him his neshama. Like we said, this is something that occurs every single day, even prior to knowing what special day this is. You haven't looked at your calendar yet. You're just saying, you already have a reason to rejoice that Hashem turned away specially to deal with me. How much more so when the idea of Simcha is increased because of the advantage and quality of the day. And in our situation, we're talking about Yom HaGeula Shel Admor Amtzoi, we're talking about the day of the redemption of the Mittler Rebbe. Just like the most ordinary person understands, in this day was a great joy and the great rejoicing because the redemption of Mittler Rebbe. And this is even if he doesn't understand the great novelty and uniqueness and the wonder of the broadness of the river and the teachings of Chassidus of the Mittler Rebbe. In other words, we're talking, he said, even a Pasha Pshutim, even the most ordinary person, not every single person appreciates the difference between the Chassidus of the Mittler Rebbe versus the Chassidus of the other Rebbe versus the Alter Rebbe, that this was like a drop and this was like a raging river. So But he does appreciate that if the Mittler Rebbe came out of prison on that day, so for sure it's a great Simcha. So therefore, there's the Simcha of just the fact that Moedan Ilfanach. Then there's the Simcha of the specialness of the day, that's the day of the redemption of the Mittler Rebbe, even if I don't understand what the Mittler Rebbe's Torah is. And the Simcha applies even more so once we delve into it and understand the idea of the broadness of the river and the idea of Bina is being the purpose and the cause for Simcha. And the Rebbe points out, v'kavonos hadvarim, the intention of the matters is kol echad v'achas miYisrael anoshim v'noshim, to every man and woman. Shekein hasimcha de Bina ema bon v'smecha nimshechas gam lebanim shisha bonim ubas. The idea of the mother of the children is rejoicing comes down both to the sons, to all the children, the 6 sons and the daughter. Hainu, this means hein benegel la'anoshim ubonim, both concerning men and sons. Hein benegel la'anoshim ubonis, and also concerning women and daughters. So now the Rebbe is going to go off a little bit on a track and say, well, what are we making a big deal about the Simcha of Yud Kislev? Simcha has a certain time of the year. Every time of the year has its Yom Tov, has its purpose, has its idea. Simcha has to do with Zman Simchas Teinu. Sukkis, Simchas Torah, that's a time of Simcha. So that's what he's going to pose this question in Ches. Still, there is a room to ask about this. It's known, it's explained in many places. The main idea of rejoicing is applicable to the time of our Simcha in the month of Tishrei. From the time of our rejoicing in Tishrei, we take the empowerment for joy, Simcha Shel Torah, v'Simcha Shel Mitzvah, v'Meshach Kol Hashana Kula, the joy of the Torah and the joy of a mitzvah throughout the entire year. And the Rebbe says in the brackets, and this is the reason why when the Rambam talks about the very important avodah, the avodah gdoila that a person has to be rejoicing and doing of a mitzvah, he writes this in the halachas in the end of Hilchas Lulav when it talks about the great simcha of the Yom Tov of Sukkot. Why does he put it over there? Because Sukkot, Man Simchaseinu, is the time when we are empowered for rejoicing the entire year. Let's skip the brackets. 3 paragraphs in the bottom of the page. If so, the question arises, Ma mokim lad goshes in nasimchol kolkach. What room is there for emphasizing joy so much in such a way that even the broadness of the river that existed before Yud Kislev comes out in a state of redemption on Yud Kislev Davka? What's so special about Yud Kislev? We already had Zman Simchaseinu, which is the primary time of Simcha. The simple explanation of this is when we find ourselves in the month of Tishrei, Madgishim, we emphasize she'ikerin nasimchu v'zman simchaseinu b'chodesh Tishrei. That we emphasize that the main idea of rejoicing is the time of our Simcha, which is the Yom Tov Sukkot, is in davening, is called the time of our Simcha. And from that time period, from Sukkot, comes down the rejoicing for the entire year. When we find ourselves in a special time in the middle of the year, we come in a special day of Yud Kislev, the day of the redemption of the Mittler Rebbe, Hari Adrab, even more so, in Yonei Shel Yom Zeh, the idea of this day, Yud Kislev, not being in Tishrei, not being in Zman Simchaseinu, not being in Sukkot. So Hadgoshes Inyan HaSimcha, the emphasis of the idea of rejoicing, Ema Bonis Mecha, the mother of the children rejoices, but even shall put together in a way of breaking through barriers of Chovis Anar, the broadness of the river, Ad Lo Oifen Shal Geula, until a manner of redemption. Nasa Shar, Shedarkoi Nichnosim V'oilim Umeirim, skip the parentheses, Kol Inyone Havoida B'meshach Kol Lashana Kula. Now, this special date on the calendar becomes now a gateway that all matters of the avodah throughout the entire year can enter and rise up and become more illuminated. Both the matters prior to Yud Kislev, including also the time of our rejoicing in the month of Tishrei. And also the things the things after the 10th of Kislev are also becoming elevated through the having the Simcha on the day of Yud Kislev. So the Rebbe continues, V'loi oid, not only that, El Mekivan she'inyanei shel Yud Kislev hu rechayvus hanar, since the idea of Yud Kislev is the broadness of the river, moving it's understood, Shegam hi yoyse shar l'chol inyanei ha'avodah, though it is idea of a gateway to all matters of avodah hu ba'ofen shel archava, it's in the way of broadness. Shar Rachav, it's a broad gate. Asher yodei nifal inyan shel archava b'chol ashar inyonei avodah l'chol hashana kula. Through Yud Kislev is affected a broadness in all the rest of the matters of avodah of the entire year. U'ka'amar, like we said before, mekivish Yud Kislev u'achas b'shana, since Yud Kislev is once in the year, the Rebbe spoke about early in the Farbrengen, this affects and influences all the days following Yud Kislev, ad Yud Kislev b'shana haba, until the following Yud Kislev in Tafshin Pei Hey. Like all Yom Tovim, it's brought down in Chassidus that every Yom Tov, let's say Pesach extends all of the hashpah of Pesach, goes on to the following Pesach, and then we get Pesach's hashpah again. Then all the hashpahs from Shavuos go on to the following Shavuos, and then we get a new hashpah of Shavuos. So now the Rebbe says a very interesting thing. What is the reason that it lasts only from Yud Kislev to the next Yud Kislev? If it's about holiness b'chlal, which should not have any limitation, especially if it's about Simcha breaks through barriers, so it should go on and on. Why do we give it an expiration date and we say it lasts from Yud Kislev to the next Yud Kislev? So the Rebbe says, Kumeduber Kamapamim, third paragraph from the top, like we spoke about many times. It's not because Yud Kislev cannot, or any Yom Tov does not have the capability to reach further and for a longer duration. All matters of holiness are in a way that they have no boundary. So therefore, it's impossible to say that any Yom Tov will expire just because the year is up. It's holiness. Holiness has no expiration, has no limit. How much more so the matter of joy. That the content of joy is breaking through barriers. So for sure, if it's breaking through barriers, how can you say it hit a barrier, years up, it's gone? It should be without an end. Since it is so that there is no limitation on it, surely the power of Yud Kislev can go on without an end past next Yud Kislev. So the Rebbe says, you know why it stops? It doesn't stop because it exhausted itself, it expired. It stops to reach a higher level. El should be Yud Kislev the Shana Abon the fallen calling Yonam Elu Boy from Naila Yoiser. But because the following Yud Kislev, all the matters that Yud Kislev stands for are now being affected in a higher way. Bligvul, without a boundary, Gam Lagaba Bligvul the Shana Zu, also in comparison to the Bligvul of this year, without the boundary of this year. So it's not that we are expiring, we're used up the energy, but we want to reach a higher level. What does it mean a higher level? We're already infinite. So he says, Ki Yadua, the Rebbe says in the parentheses, Shagam B'Bligvul, Yeshem Chiluki Dargis, Bilu Acher Ilui. Also in the infinite, there's many different levels in infinite, and we will not go into that now. So here the Rebbe concludes ois tes, yesh lo v'amaisa or ikar, action is primary. Yesh lo hoisev bin simcha, we have to increase in matters of joy. Simcha shel Torah v'simcha shel mitzvah. The joy of Torah and the joy of mitzvah, v'simcha b'chlal, and joy in general. B'yaser seis u'b'yaser ois, in a much more powerful state and much stronger state. Ubepashtus, and simply put, like the Rambam brings down from David HaMelech, simcha ba'ofen the mefazon macharker, simcha in a way of hopping and dancing. Ubezeh gufa, and also this itself, it says over there, b'chol ois, with all of his might. Meaning ba'ofen shalamaylam mekol medida v'agbol, in such a way it's beyond all measure and boundary. Ad la'ofen shel geula, to the degree of a manner of being a redemption. Afilu l'gaba simcha, puts us together the rechayvus hanar debina. Even in comparison to the joy and the breaking through the boundaries of the broadness of the river of Bina that was there before the Geula, now when there's a Geula, there's a redemption, it's breaking through those barriers. Like we said before, laham zois gam al yomim shel ha'achrizeh, to bring this forward even for the following days. So the Rebbe said this Sikha by a Farbrengen on Shabbos, Parshas Vayetze. The Farbrengen was Shabbos afternoon. It's a winter afternoon. Shabbos finishes early. You got to make sure to daven mincha on time. So the Rebbe is going to say over here that seemingly there is all types of limitations. You got to know when to daven mincha and so on. So how do you fit it all together? So though it's wanted that the joy should be in a way it's beyond all measure and boundary, so the Rebbe says in the brackets, not always are we successful to effect by those participating in the Farbrengen everything we want. So in other words, we might want that everybody should be in a state of simcha beyond all barriers and limitations, but that doesn't always work out. But regardless of that, seemingly there's something that sets a limit over here. As inyan hasimcha, the idea of joy. We have to look at the clock to know when we're going to make an after blessing. Since we have to daven mincha on time, along with Kriyas HaTorah, which makes mincha even longer. So the Rebbe says as follows: Torah cannot put a damper on our pritzas geder. Since this limitation is Torah based, we must say we have the empowerment to effect this in such a way of the little that holds much. When Hashem requests of us something, He only requests according to our capability. So if in this limited amount of time, the Rebbe says, that's left between now and we have to daven mincha, we are asked to do simcha b'li gvul, we can fit in this small amount of time, the meruba, the large. Because Hashem requested us, and Hashem doesn't request of us things that we're incapable of. Al derech shematzinu, similar we find, shafilu ois achas b'Torah kalel skol Torah kula, even one letter of the entire Torah, it's brought down, Chazal includes in it the entire Torah. That Chazal said Keser Shemtiv, Koil Masher Talmud Vosagos L'Chadish, including also what any diligent student will eventually come up with. Hainu, this means to say, though what we're talking about over here is something that demands a great length of time, the Simcha needs seemingly Simcha without a boundary needs a lot of time. So the Rebbe says, Yesh koyach lifol zois meshach zman muat, we have the capability to effect it in a small amount of time. But oifen the muat hamachzik samaruba, in such a way that even the little can contain a lot. But pashtus, and simply put, shebizman mugbal zeh, in this limited amount of time, tiyah simcha ba'oifen shalamayla mikol medida v'agbola, there should be a joy beyond every type of measure and boundary. Like the expression of the pasuk in the parsha of the week, that says, you will break through the barrier, you will break through, and you will, from the word pritzes gather, Yaakov Avinu was blessed to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, which the Chazal say, Yaakov Avinu was promised a nachla b'limet sorim, a lot, an inheritance without boundaries, not like Avram Avinu that told him that you'll reach till Nahar Pros, till the Euphrates, and here and there. Yaakov Avinu was promised without boundaries. Let's skip over a little bit. So the Rebbe goes on in the same theme, like he said before, that even though there's a very limited amount of time, and the Rebbe says even more so, but by Farbrengen, the way it works is we speak a little bit and then we sing and dance a little bit. We speak and we sing and dance. So the time of singing and dancing is even limited by the speaking. Still in all, we could draw down this amazing thing. Let's go 2 paragraphs. Let's skip down to 2 paragraphs on top of Yud, if you could find it over there. So he says, "Va'afal pikein," still in all, gam bezman achi mugbal zeh, even in this limited amount of time, mamshichim upoilim simcha chinailis, we draw down and affect the greatest joy, lamailim komedida v'agbala, beyond every measure and boundary. Umizem moving goydel askus, from this is understood the great merit, ubiyachadim zeh achrayis, along with the merit, it's also understood the great responsibility. Benitzul regoyim elu, in putting to use these moments. We were given in these few moments left of the Farbrengen unbelievably elevated power. Skip the parentheses. Though these few minutes and are so limited, a very little amount of time, we are able to effect in it a joy that's beyond all measure and boundary. Should be the will of Hashem. This great joy should break through all barriers. First and foremost, first of all, even though we said before Simcha Peiritz Gather is talking about the gather of Kedusha, but before that, we should remove all the barriers of things that are the opposite of Kedusha. All matters of obstacles and things that block, and you know, these days we know about a lot of terrible things going on in the world. They become completely nullified until no impression and no mark is left from them whatsoever. Just the opposite. The more that the Yidden are afflicted, not only is there no mark left, but this itself, that's how much he will increase and that's how much he will break through. In this idea is emphasized 2 extremes. On the one hand, we forget totally till there remains no impression whatsoever, no mark, no remnant from the negative thing. As long as we have a recollection of things that are negative, there can't be the idea of increase and breaking through in its true manner. Along with this, since also in the matter that's unwanted and negative, there's also a spark of holiness. We must say that through this negative thing was added an elevation in matters of Kedusha, because there's a holy spark in it. And that's why we say, Kain Yirba v'Kain Yifreit, so it will increase and so it will break forth. It's a great elevation over the state before the descent. What were the Yidden? What was it said about the Yidden when they went on Mitzrayim? Kasher Yanu, in exact ratio and relationship to how much they were afflicted, that's how much they grew and that's how much they broke through. Which means that if not for the suffering, then they wouldn't have had the breaking through and the bursting forth and so on. So this means that the increase is thanks to and a result of that godly spark that's embedded in the negative. Va'adli ili gadol kol kach, to such a great elevation, shebegloloi ha'kedai inyan shel yerida ba'ofen shel debrega kot nazavtich. It's such a great ascent that occurs because of it, that for that great ascent, it was worth a while, the descent, in a way that Hashem says, a short moment I have left you. So that through this should be the ascent of, so he will increase and so he will break forth. In addition to this, in addition to breaking through the barriers of Klippa, will breaking through the barriers of holiness. This means in addition to the fact that all matters of holiness are perfect and complete. We break through the barriers of perfection of Kedusha, of completion of Kedusha, and we add and increase even more so. In a way of a broadness of the river, a inheritance without boundaries, or the pashtus, and simply put, we merit the fulfillment of the promise, that Hashem will broaden your boundaries. In addition, concerning matters of perfection and all matters of holiness, beginning from perfection in matters of redemption, which is geula mitzvah shlema, the true and complete redemption. Pratis, more specifically, shlemas haaretz, the wholeness of the land. Eretz asher goymer tamid ein Hashem l'kacha b'amarei shana v'dach l'shana, a land that always the eyes of Hashem, of your God, is in it from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. Befrat b'shnasa ibur, that especially in a year where, like this year also, there's two others. Sheba mudgish inyan hashleimis shana tmima, a year that has two others is called a complete year, a whole year. The Chazal call it brought from a pasuk. And shleimis ha'am, in addition to shleimis ha'aretz, complete land, we have the complete nation. B'nareinu v'zkenenu, with our youth and our elderly. B'baneinu v'naseinu, with our sons and our daughters. V'kaspa v'zav v'itam, and their silver and gold with them. Hein kesef v'zav ruchnim, both spiritual silver and gold. Ava v'yira, which we know that Ava is the word kama nichsef nichsafti, that kolsa nafshi al Hashem, that's the level of kesef, and gold is the idea of awe and fear of Hashem, which we know is shoydish kol machmet esesor shesamit esloisil, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that silver, Ava, is the root of all positive commandments, awe is the root of all the negative commandments, shleimus ha'torah mitzvah, the perfection and completion of Torah and its mitzvahs. Ve'hein kesef v'zav gashmer, and also we will leave golus with physical silver and gold, shenishtal shlumehen, because the physical silver and gold came down spiritually by an evolving of it from the spiritual silver and gold to physical silver and gold. Nifa b'kulam inyan shel archava, will be affected in all of them, a matter of broadness. Yarchav Hashem alekechas gvulcha, that Hashem will broaden your boundary. Rechayvus hanar, the broadness of the river. Nachla b'lin mitzadim, the inheritance and lot without boundaries. V'aschol b'zeh, the beginning of this is that even before Mashiach comes, gam b'mei ha'golos ha'achronim, also in the final days of Golos, zoich mikvar la'archava b'kol inyanim, we merit already broadness in all matters. Ba nechayim azayne revicha b'kolm revicha. Children, life, sustenance in a comfortable manner, and all of them should be comfortable. How much more so we merit the broadness, and everything is connected in the avoid of spreading the well springs outward, like I mentioned, the Rebbe said at the beginning of the Farbrengen. Through that we quicken and we affect the coming of Mashiach. The master, the King Mashiach, will come when the Mayonis is spread outward, speedily in our days. Mamash.